Despite what this abysmal year brought us in terms of a pandemic dominating the majority of it, a brush with World War III, and yes, that happened this year, and massive civil unrest across the world, there was one redeeming factor for this god-awful 366 straight days that made it almost bearable. And that would be that anime in 2020 was pretty damn good on the whole, with some well-executed stories like the near lifelong journey in Kakushigoto, amazing animation and too many to count, but let's go with Eizouken for its stunning creativity, series rich in themes like Deca-Dence dealing with layers upon layers of narrative, telling us about how we engage with stories, and anime that just had fun stories to tell that resonated with viewers, like the batshit insanity that was the Misfit of Demon King Academy. There was too much that was good this year that I can't even really keep track of it all. But let's talk about some highlights, because as often as I smother my commentary in snark, pessimism, and a jaded persona, I like to wrap up the year by talking about what I liked about my hobby. And before we get into it, here's the subscription plug. Why don't you go ahead and do that? Right. Animation, comedy, and intrigue blended expertly in winter this year with Lurch's adaptation of the writer-illustrator duo Ida Iro's manga, Toilet-Bound Hanako-kun. This was a series that spoke to me on so many levels, through not just its story, which was an intriguing, light-hearted, dark comedy twist on a love story with mystery elements, but with striking character designs that fill the anime with personality by reinforcing the lighter tones using thicker lines, warm and surreal color palettes, and utilizing a method of movement that captures the manga roots of the series so masterfully that it feels like an extension of the source rather than an adaptation. Ando Masaomi handled directing duties for this series, which certainly sold it, as he was the director of Gakko Gurashi, Astro Lost in Space, and Scum's Wish, which shows his talent in the director's seat by bringing a stylistic and cinematic experience to the small screen. And that's a good summary of this series. Utilizing mood, dead space, and levity to reinforce emotions, characters, and subsequently the audience feel. This was a welcome adaptation, made with love. Science Saru brought us an adaptation of Owara Sumito's manga, Hands Off the Motion Picture Club, or Eizouken Niwate Odasuna, dripping with not just personality, but love for the medium of anime as a whole. This was a series that oozed with nostalgia for childhood anime, perfectly encapsulating the ideas and feelings one gets when they first watched anime. It takes those emotions and applies them to a bombastic, youthful creativity where anything and everything really goes. This wasn't a typical nostalgia bait anime that referenced old things to try and connect with the audience, but one that used nostalgia to remind the audience what they loved originally through sensations and excitement. And I'll admit, I was swept up in that. The imagination scenes in this series combined a sketchbook aesthetic and dynamic camera work to create something that I haven't seen in anime. One of the more interesting aspects of the production of this series was how the staff shared duties, allowing the director and assistant director to both storyboard, animate, and compose the series, indicating to me that they were heavily involved with every aspect of the production. That's why this series feels so much like a love letter to the medium itself, and honestly, why I fell in love with it. Interspecies Reviewers was an awkward, raunchy, and borderline pornographic addition to the anime roster this year, but I can't say I wasn't entertained by how unapologetic it was with its themes and perversion. This series toys with the typical fantasy tropes of adventures and fantasy RPG mechanics by showing what would happen in the off time in a world filled to the brim with races that intermingle, specifically how they get to know each other outside of combat and dungeoneering, and that's part of the dumb fun this series strives for, even taking a moment or two to poke fun at isekai, magic, and monsters, almost like the older trends in anime are laughing at the newer ones, but it never takes itself seriously to feel like it actually believes it's superior. It's not highbrow by any means, but I enjoyed how unrepentant it was by pushing the envelope to the point that it was pulled from streaming services outside Japan. Not for everyone, especially those under 18, but entertaining nonetheless. One of my favorite mangaka was back with a new adaptation of his work, Kakushigoto. This was a series that felt reminiscent of his older stuff like Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei, but showcased how versatile the style of humor the creator employs can be. Rather than being dark and political, Kakushigoto stayed with home life in the manga industry as its main source of comedy, mixing that with dumb puns, slow growth through the series, and a main narrative about how much a father would do to keep his relationship with his daughter positive while raising her single-handedly, and mourning the loss of his wife. This series constantly looks towards the future. I love that positivity and message. Murano Yuta captured the essence of this series while keeping it familiar to fans of the manga, and it was certainly a welcome adaptation this year, with a heartfelt story that resonated with me personally. Trigger finally came back onto the scene with their new original anime released on Netflix, Brand New Animal, indicative of a lot of their earlier work since it shares a creative team with them. This series highlights how far the studio's come at building a series, with a quirky cast of characters dealing with an existential threat bigger than themselves that they couldn't reasonably grapple with, but rising to the occasion, embracing who they really are, and striving for a better world. I won't say this series is perfect, as it does mix its metaphors and doesn't explore its themes and setting as well as it could have, but it's decently executed. The animation is energetic, selling the kinetic energy in every hit in the action scenes, and the comedic moments are captured in a ridiculously over-the-top way we've come to expect, and neither is exclusive to one another, as is a hallmark of Trigger's style. And on top of that, the neon pastel color palette used in the more moody parts of this series gives a distinct visual style that no other show has tried to capture and feels uniquely Trigger. I found myself enjoying every moment of this series and would happily recommend other people to check it out. It may seem a bit unfair to say one of the best shows this year is a sequel, but Season 2 of Kaguya-sama wa Kokurasetai, or Kaguya-sama Love is War, expands on what made the first season so great. And it wasn't just by keeping the humor consistently funny from Season 1, as most second seasons have some sort of diminishing returns in that department, but by how masterfully it showed the growth in the cast. Seeing Kaguya and Miyuki shift from their reluctance to even admit that they have feelings for one another to almost forgetting about their game of cat and mouse most times, and genuinely looking for the other to finally confess their feelings, gets me invested in the relationship these two have. Probably better than any other actual romance anime I've seen has managed to do. Shinichi Omata, with his broad experience in just about every aspect of production to planning, directing, and animation, brought Akasaka Aka's work to life in this amazing adaptation that showcases great comedy, three-dimensional characters, a captivating romance plot, and amazing animation to hit both comedic and dramatic beats hard. There's a reason why people couldn't stop talking about Kaguya-sama this year, and it's easy to see why. Deca-Dence was an unexpected treat from summer this year that pulled off a twist well, and didn't do so for the shock value a twist is often utilized for. Instead, it clued the audience in early and built the story around the tension such a reveal would create in the world. That builds layers of narrative in a world where humans struggle against monsters as part of a game where cyborgs kill time as a system keeps both populations sedated. I love how this anime played with the idea of narrative structures to break the mold for even larger stories to build on the foundation of smaller ones. And that kept me invested in the main cast as they fight against these impossibly large threats. Nut, the studio behind this one, shown here, by utilizing a free camera to keep the action scenes visually exciting, as we follow characters weaving between monsters in a three-dimensional space. With directing talents from Tachikawa Yuzuru, director of Mob Psycho 100, it was a given how amazing this series would turn out. One of the few original series in 2020 that gave me hope that the industry wasn't out of ideas. The long-awaited Season 2 of Re:Zero finally hit in summer of this year, and it wasn't merely worth the wait, but demonstrated why this franchise is one of the most popular in the isekai genre, where the first season spent a lot of time building its characters and world before delving into the story. This season capitalized on the work already put in Season 1, not just allowing the story to develop, but doing so in a way that deepens the cast, their emotions, motivations, and ultimately why the audience should care. And it managed to do so exceedingly well. But most importantly, it shows that while Subaru grew a lot in the first season, he still has so much more to do, and it redeemed his character quite a bit for me personally. The animation for this series was leagues above the first in many ways, approaching its scenes in a more artistic and personal way that helps convey the complex emotions the lead is going through. This may have managed to salvage the franchise for me, making me appreciate it more. I know I often come off as some jackoff who values anime with a profound message or it tells its story in a beautiful way, but I also enjoy ones that are unrepentant in how fun they can be, which is exactly why I got into the Misfit of Demon King Academy, since it was a chance to cut loose this year. This was a series that threw some of the most absurd cliches in shonen anime together, combined them with a protagonist so overpowered it would be obscene by isekai standards, and glued the whole thing together with a storyline ripped from every tired light novel written to create a foundation that's indistinguishable from sincerity or parody. We've reached the Poe's law of anime, and it's kinda glorious. I found the saving grace for this series to be that while everything seems to be treated with the utmost seriousness, the protagonist doesn't care and shrugs off everything, making for some hype fights and an excellent comedic punch in the same realm as One Punch Man. Though I will say lacking some of that delivery specifically. I'm not trying to say they're equal there, but you get what I mean. And holding that experience together was a decently animated series that threw a good amount of its budget into its fight scenes, creating a visually impactful series that stayed with me. Dumb or not, this was unadulterated fun, and something I'd recommend. Akudama Drive in Fall is the last this year to affirm that original anime projects aren't dead. Between BNA, Deca-Dence, and this, we had some heavy hitters, and this one certainly didn't pull any punches. I could talk for ages about the atmosphere in this series, how it trips cyberpunk dystopia without smashing the audience in the face with it. I could go on about the aesthetic and how nice this series looks from a technical standpoint, with striking color choices, unique memorable silhouettes for the cast that tell their stories without them having to say anything. I could even gush about the action choreography, and how this series shows these larger-than-life fights through massive hits, earth-shattering blows, and amazing acrobatic work. Or I could go on about the themes of civil unrest and unjust government, police brutality, and how state-imposed violence is a tool of the ruling class to pacify the proletariat into comfortable numbness through routine ritual sacrifice, driving ordinary citizens into the criminal role by standing up against injustice. Each of those could be their own video, and I'm still not capturing everything about this series I loved, which is why I just want to say the director, Taguchi Tomohisa and Studio Period, did some amazing work. This is a must-watch series that lives up to any hype you may have heard about it. Slow-paced romance stories that take their time to get the audience invested in the characters and their relationship before thrusting the romance angle on the viewers are rare, which is why I appreciate Adachi and Shimamura. This was a series that didn't rush into the whole romance thing because the characters themselves aren't entirely convinced they're in love with each other. They're teenagers who don't know what falling in love is. And falling for a member of the same sex when you're still coming to terms with who you are as a person, because that's what you do as a teenager, is even more confusion to top it off. But it's through that confusion and awkward interpersonal relationship building that we come to know who Adachi and Shimamura are, two teens on the introverted side, and overwhelmed by the new responsibility blossoming adulthood is bringing them. There's a different approach to love in this series, and it requires the cast to show that they love one another without realizing it. That's honestly one of the best ways to sell a romantic relationship to the audience. Told through monologue and metaphor, this series feels aloof, but it's more introspective and has some interesting visuals. Iruma Hitoma's story and Osaka Nozomi's art come to life in this different sort of shoujo-ai anime. Gotta say, it was definitely one of my favorites this year. Most people assume the shonen battle genre died with the big three, leaving only One Piece remaining, and My Hero Academia coming from behind to turn off the lights. The last few years have been great for the genre, with Kimetsu no Yaiba, Fire Force, and this season brought us Mappa's take on Jujutsu Kaisen. Looking at this one, it appears incredibly unremarkable. The protagonist seems like any other shonen protagonist, with an absent family swept into a world of superpowers and fights, and him seemingly doing so because it's the right thing to do. However, I found the entire cast for this one to have far more depth than typical shonen characters, with believable motivations that are rooted in their backstory and inform about who they are. Not to mention, this one touches on a whole host of themes and genres skillfully, from horror, comedy, drama, action, supernatural, mystery, and all of these are blended together wonderfully into a complete package. The one thing that could make this series even better than it already is would be if it had amazing animation. Oh hey look, Mappa gave this series amazing animation. They went to great lengths to ensure that, using unique line work, fantastic cinematography, and outstanding fight choreography, selling the fights to the audience like crystallized hype. I really wasn't expecting a shonen series to be this good, and definitely more people need to check this out. So that's it. 2020's in the books finally, and these were just some of my top picks for shows. I didn't even mention everything I liked because that would be like an hour-long video. I really don't have time for that, sorry. But these are the cream of the crop. And looking back on this year, I feel confident in saying that this was one of the best years in anime in a long time. And I mean that sincerely. Despite everything happening, there was an amazing roster of shows this year, and just really shockingly good animation quality considering the pandemic. And I'll take it after the year we had. But let me know what you all think. What shows did you really like this year? Tell me down in the comments. And here's hoping that 2021 is better for not just anime, but for the rest of us as well. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and I know you already subscribed, but check on that for me just in case. You can join my Discord with the link down in the description if you want to chat with me, and support me on Patreon, where for just $1 you get to vote on what I do next. Speaking of, I'd like to thank Nadeshiko for their continued support. Thanks for watching.